Okay, I think we will start. Om Bhadram Karne Vishunuyama Devaha Bhadram Pashyemakshabir Yajatraha Sthirairangai Tuštuvagum Sastanubihi Vyashema Devahitam Yadayuhu Swasti na Indro Vriddashabhaha Swasti na Pusha Vishwavedaha Swasti nastarkshyo arishthanemihi Swasti no brihaspatir dadhatu Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi. So welcome back to this class, Mundakopanishad. I think we have had nearly 3 weeks break, I think. You could have had last week, but for my health, I was not keeping good health. So we had to cancel last week and have it this week. So we have so far seen 5 mantras. In fact, in the third mantra, Shaunaka was asking, Kasmin Vijnate Sarvamitam Vijnatam Bhavati iti, by knowing that what I'll be known of. And Angiras, when he was actually replying to this question, he said that instead of actually answering that question directly, see, the question was, please tell me by knowing that I'll be known of everything. Instead of giving a direct answer to that, Angiras started with a much bigger picture. He said there are 2 types of Dve Veditavye, Para Chaiva Parati. So he started saying there is something called Paravidya, there is something called Aparavidya. And so he has still answered the question. He is answering the question in a slightly, if you may have to say, slightly digressive or in a detailed fashion. So he said there is this Paravidya and there is this Aparavidya. And then he said he started enumerating what is Aparavidya first. And that's where we had stopped last time. That's what the mantra 5 is. So in the 5th mantra, this is how it goes. Tatra para Rigvedo Yajurvedah Samavedo Tarvavedah Siksho Kalpo Vyakaranam Niruktam Chando Jyotishamiti. So the first 2 lines define the Aparavidya. Ata para yaya tad aksharam adigamyate. Then he says, now there is something called para, and yaya, through that vidya, by virtue of having acquired that vidya, which is the para vidya, tad aksharam adigamyate. That one is able to go beyond the world of meanings. So this is where we were last time. As we see here, in the first two lines, there is this definition of Aparavidya. And what does it have? It has the 4 Vedas. Rigvedo, Yajurvedah, Samavedo, Atharvavedah. So the first line has enumerated the 4 Vedas. And the second line enumerates what is called Vedanga. There are 6 Vedangas. Siksha, Kalpa, Vyakaranam, Niruktam, Chandas, Jyotisham, Iti. So we saw the 4 Vedas in some details. Last time when we met, we had a quick look at the 4 Vedas. And then there are these 6 Vedangas. So in some sense, the Vedas and the Vedangas are included as part of the Aparavidya. Now these Vedas and Vedangas are just a reference. Essentially what it indicates is in Sanatana Dharma, as many of us know, everything flows out of the Vedas. So therefore, when he says the 4 Vedas are Aparavidya, essentially in a way what is being implied here is all these gamut of knowledge which flows out of the Vedas. You know, the Smritis are also based on Vedas. The Dharma Shastras are again based on Vedas. Itihasa Puranas, the Shad Darshanas, that's why they are called Astika Darshanas. Because every one of these literature owes its allegiance to the Vedas and essentially tries to explain Vedas in some amount of detailing. That's the reason why merely 4 Vedas is being mentioned here. So by that, what we need to infer is this whole body of knowledge that we are aware of. He is classifying them as Aparavidya. Then you have the second line, which is the Vedangas. So these Vedangas are very, very important, because without the Vedangas, you cannot make sense of the Vedas. That's why the Vedanga is also included. So essentially, from these 2 lines, what we understand is the Vedas, all literature which is flowing out of the Vedas, which owes allegiance to Vedas, which explains what is being stated in Vedas in a different way and in greater detail into a more an operational domain and all that. And that set of ideas which make sure we understand Veda properly, preserve it properly and keep it properly, which is called Vedangas. All these are called Aparavidya. So we saw the Vedas, we'll quickly see the Vedangas. It's important to know why these Vedangas are very, very important. You know, in this country, you know, in the Shravana Purnima, which comes in August, typically in August, you know, depending upon the Adhika Masa and Chandra Masa and all that, anywhere between July, August, that's the time you get what is called Upakarma. You know, that's the time they do what is called Vedaramba. So the Shravana Purnima is when they change the sacred thread and they start what is called Vedaramba. Now, in Paushyam Purnamasyam, which is 6 months before, which is after the Makara Sankranti, that Purnami, that time they do what is called Vedanga. They read Vedanga. So 6 months they read Vedanga. That was the Paddhati. 6 months they were reading Vedanga, and 6 months they were reading Veda. So when they were reading the Veda, that's when they do the Upakarma and change the, you know, Yajnopavita and all that. So this Vedanga is very important. They play a very important role. And these 6 components have 6 different roles to play. So let us quickly understand that, and then we'll come to the question of how can Veda be Aparavidya, which we already saw. We'll have to revisit it again. So these Vedangas play a very, very important role. First of all, our Vedic tradition is a oral tradition. Because it is a oral tradition, pronunciation is of of extremely important requirement, because the meaning will change, the words will all get corrupted and so on, because everything is transmitted orally. So there is this first Vedanga called Siksha. In Untitled Upanishad, it starts with that Siksham ya akya syamah varnaswara matra balam sama santana. There are the 6 components which make varna, swara, matra, bala, sama and santana. So these are the elements which make Siksha. So there is a Paniniya Siksha, where all these rules are laid out and so on. Essentially, it is all about phonetics. It's all about proper pronunciation, because in a oral tradition, if everything has to be kept intact, then we should elevate this whole pronunciation to the level of science, which is what our ancestors have done. It's actually a good science of sound. So that is the first Vedanga called Siksha. Then, of course, Vyakarna, and we know what Vyakarna is. It's grammar. It is every word has to be properly constructed, syntactically correct, so that it provides a correct meaning and so on. So grammar is so important for any language. Therefore, that is the second Vedanga, which is Vyakarna. Then you have the third Vedanga called Nirukta. Actually, Nirukta is a work based on what is called Nigantu. Nigantu is the original book of synonyms and etymology. See, if you look at our entire literature, or Indian literature, they are divided into 2. One is called Chandas, another is called Bhasha. This is one terminology used. Chandas means anything written in Veda. See, Sanskrit, if you take, Sanskrit can be Chandas or Bhasha. The moment you say Chandas, what it means is that which are written in the Vedic, in the Vedas, in the Brahmanas and Samhitas, and that is called Chandas. And then you have Kalidasa's literature, you have so many other later date literature which came from the 2nd century BC onwards. They are called Bhasha. Now, the rules that govern Chandas in terms of some of the words that are used, the way they are used, are slightly different from, not always, but there are a set of unique representation of Vedic language, Chandas. So therefore, unless we know exactly that, we will not understand what is the intended meaning. So this Nirukta was written by Yaska based on what is called Nigantu. The Nigantu is the collection of those words which are very specifically used only in Chandas, not in Bhasha. It has a specific meaning only for, so in order to understand the Vedas, we should need Nirukta also. It's a book of synonyms and etymology and so on. Then there is this Chandas. This Chandas is prosody. This is the science of writing a poetry. Earlier, when I used the word Chandas, that is more used to say anything written in Veda is called Chandas, anything written in non-Vedic literature is called Bhasha. In that sense, I use the word Chandas. Whereas here, this Chandas is a technical word. What it means is prosody. There is a way by which the mantras are to be written. This is very, very important. Our entire Vishnu Sahasranama, for example, our Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharata, everything is in Anushtup Chandas. The idea of that is it has these internal checks and balances. Because in Anushtup, we will see the Chandas. At that time, we will understand. Anushtup means there are so many eight syllables per pada. So if one akshara is extra or one akshara is gone, it will immediately show up because your recitation will not be proper. So that's the internal checks and balances to prevent corruption. So that body of knowledge which is used by the Veda to create their mantras is called Chandas, which is rules for, how long is the mantra, how many syllables get into a mantra. All those are governed by Chandas, and that's the only way you can preserve, so that some dropping or additional aksharas are not part of the mantra. You can quickly recognize it. Then you have what is called Kalpa Sutras. This is so many things are told in Veda, There are elaborate rituals, there are, prescriptions for life. So many things are there. So they are all laid out in the form of some proper rules and practices and norms. One has to use that. It's like a rule book. It's like an operational manual. If you have to do a Rajasya Yajna or Aptaryama Soma Yajna, then the Kalpa Sutras will tell how do you set up, how many people are involved, who will do what, when, what should be done, what mantra should be used, what kind of practices one has to follow, how long should you do it. So it's a detailed operational manual which is required so that we can make use of the Vedic prescriptions and injunctions and put it to our daily use. So that is called Kalpa. Then you have what is called Jyotisha. Jyotisha is actually not astrology. Jyotisha is actually astronomy. Because the Vedanga Jyotisha, this Jyotisha is part of the Vedanga Jyotisha. Not today's Jyotisha is slightly little bit different, where there is a Palita Jyotisha. You are doing prediction of what will happen and so on. Whereas this Jyotisha that you see here, which is part of the Vedanga, is a set of methodology to use astronomy, to use the principles of luminary bodies, the stars and the planets and so on, use it for fixing time and date, etc., for doing so many things that we have to do in our life. Again, which are all prescribed in the Vedas. So these 6 components of Vedangas, each one of them bring a certain unique role, and they serve a very unique purpose, so that our mantras are properly, Ucharana is done properly, so that it is transmitted properly, syntactically correct, and correct meanings can be understood with Nirutta. It's all preserved without any additional akshara or dropping of akshara through chandas. Then there is a detailed operational manual and when to do kind of. So this is how the 6 Vedangas are there. And without these 6 Vedangas, Veda cannot be made use of. Either we will miss part of it, misinterpret it, not know what to do. It will be just a piece of information available without knowing what to do. That is why 6 months they do Vedaramba and Veda Adhyayana. Another 6 months they do Vedanga Adhyayana, because these two have to go together. So that's why this is also added along with Veda and called it as Aparavidya. Very quickly, I'll show some of them. Siksha, for example, is all about how there is enormous thinking which has gone behind how sounds actually originate. Because unless you know it, then the pronunciation will not be pakka. So this is a, if you look at Siddhanta Kaumudi or something, there will be all these formula will be there. For example, Ahuka Visarjaniyam Kantaha. A and Ku. Ku means the kavarga, the last one you see here, which is the kanta, throat. A, Ku, Kuvarga. Kuvarga means Kaka, Gha, Gha, Nga. Then Ha. Then Visarga. So Ahuka Visarjaniyam Kantaha. Ichu Yashanam Taluhu. Litu Lasanam Dantaha. Like this, the formulas are there. So this is identifying which letter will originate from which part of our oral cavity. So these are all the part of the Siksha. So properly one has to understand the Nyangaman Namanam, Nya, Nya, Na, Na, Ma. All those are nasal. It's called Nasika. You have to use, in addition to its original place, also one has to use their nose also. The sound will come only through that. Like this, a lot of detailed analysis has been done. This forms part of Siksha, which I talked about. Then comes the Nirukta. Nirukta comes from what is called Nigantu. So this Nigantu has 3 divisions: Nigantuka Kanda, Naigama Kanda, and Daivata Kanda. So there are about 1,000, 2,000 and odd words, I think. 1,800 words or something. All these words have been identified in the Vedic text, and they have been grouped into set of synonyms. Because unless we know all these, we cannot understand the meaning, because their usage is slightly different from the usage that you find in the normal Bhasha. So it is, Nigantu is a collection of rarely used words in the Vedas. Something like a thesaurus, where we can think like that. And it is Yaska who wrote Nirukta, who looked at the Nigantu and wrote what is called Nirukta in the 5th century BCE, which is a commentary on the Nigantu. That is one of the Vedangas. So he employed a methodology by which he extracted the meaning of the word using linguistic theories, some phonetic, similarity of certain words and all that, similarity of the sounds. So he analyzed many things and came with what is called Nirukta. So without a good understanding or even retaining a Nirukta with us, sometimes we cannot make sense of a certain Vedic mantra. So the meaning can be slightly different there. So that is the Nirukta. Then comes this Chandas. So I have taken the first mantra from Pavamana, which is there in the 9th and the 10th mandala of Rigveda, I think, Samhita. This is the first mantra. Swadishtaya Madishtaya Pavasvaso Madharaya Indra Patave Sutaha. That is the first mantra. Now, if you look at this mantra, there are actually 24 syllables in this mantra. And the last, row has that. Swa, Dish, Ta, Ya, Ma, Dish, Ta, Ya. Up to that is 8 actually. Swa, Dish, Ta, Ya, Ma, Dish, Ta, Ya. That is 8. Then Pa, Va, Swa, So, Ma, Dha, Ra, Ya. Again, they are 8. Pavasva, So, Ma, Dha, Ra, Ya. Then you have Indraya Patave Sutaha, that is also 8. Indraya Patave Sutaha. So now if you take this mantra, so this is the basic building block of any mantra. Mantra is made of syllables. In this case, there are 24 syllables. The 24 syllables are made into 3 padas here. Swadishtaya Madishtaya is one pada. Pavasva Somadharaya is the second pada. Indraya Patave Sutaha is the third pada. So there are 3 padas. So syllables are assembled into padas, and then a certain combination of pada is called a meter. So this is how the Chanda Shastra is built for the Vedic thing. So this is called Gayatri meter. Gayatri meter is always 24 syllables in 3 padas. In fact, Bhurbusa Tassaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi is 23. It's called Nishit Gayatri. That's why Om Bhurvasvaha Tassavitur Om Tassaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhyo Prachodayat will be actually 24. If we simply take Tassaviturvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, that will be only 23. It's called Nishit Gayatri and so on. Anyway, this is called a Gayatri meter. Now in Veda, if you look at the entire Vedic meter, there are only 7 which are very popular. Gayatri, Ushnik, Anushtup, Brihati, Pankti, Trishtup, Jagatyas, Chandamsi is what they say. So there are these 7 meters which are used. Most of the Vedic thing is based on this meter only. So just now I showed you Gayatri meter, 3 padas of 8 syllables each. That's 24 syllables. Ushnik is 3 padas only, but 8 plus 8 plus 12, making it 28. Anushtup is very popular. We have Bhagavad Gita, Ramayana, Mahabharata. Most of it is written on Anushtup. 4 padas of 8 syllables each. That is called Anushtup. Brihati is again 4 pada, but 8 plus 8 plus 12 plus 8, 36. Pankti means 5. And if you remember in Untitled Pang, Tamba, Itagum Sarvam, Pankte Neva Taggis Pranoti, there it is 5. Pankti means 5 actually. So 5 padas, each of 8 syllables is called Pankti, that meter. Then you have Trishtup. Trishtup is again a popular one. 4 padas of 11 syllables each, 4 into 11, 44. Then you have the Jagati, which is 4 padas of 12 syllables each. So Vedic meters fit into any of these, and that Vedanga is called Chandas. Of course, Kalpa is there. As I told you, Kalpa is actually a guide or a user manual that provides instructions and directions to lead all aspects of life. Because at that time, the life was woven into the Vedic. So it is a Vedic living. So for everything, you have to fall back on the Veda only. And they have to provide all instructions. That's why the Kalpa as a Vedanga provides all those instructions. So they are all typically in sutra forms. That's why we call Kalpa Sutras. And it provides all the important aspects of ancient living, because it covers everything. Household ceremonies. For example, if one has to do a Chaturmasya Vrata, Dashapurna Ishti, or Putrakama Ishti, whatever you want to do, all rituals and practices are laid out only in Kalpa. So it has 4 broad divisions. Srauta Sutras. Srauta means Shruti, those which are to do with Shruti. So all guide for Vedic rituals, everything is available in Srauta Sutras. Then you have Sulba Sutra. Sulba means thread actually. So Sulba Sutra is all about how do you construct the Vedic altars using a thread and a stick. You can actually put a stick, tie a thread to it. So using that, you can generate some circles. So use a lot of circular constructions to generate whatever shape is required, whether it's a trapezoid or a rhombus or a square or a rectangle, everything can be done. Sulba Sutra has, Katyayana Sulba Sutra is there, 2-3 such Vatsyayana, Sulba Sutras are there. So that give all the rules for construction of fire altars, sacrificial palace, etc., places, etc. Then you have Grihya Sutras, which is all about household ceremonies. We have Upasanas, we have Agni Karyas, we have quite a few of these household rituals and ceremonies. They are all written in Grihya Sutras. Then you have Dharma Sutras, which talks about a lot of things that we have to do in part of the social life, Kamya Karmas, Naimitika Karmas, all those are all to be how it has to be done. And it is talks about the broader social living and so on. So in a way, Kalpa Sutra is a good window to the Vedic living. And it draws upon all the Vedic literature and gives us specific things to do. Just to give you an example, these are typically used in Shrauta rituals. You have one altar called Garhya Patyagni, which is always on the western side. That altar is circular. Then you have Ahavani Agni, which is on the eastern side. Now the area of Ahavani Agni altar and the Garhya Patyagni altar has to be same. That's why pi is required, because the area of the circle should be equal to the area of the square. They should be of the identical area. So that's why Indians knew the value of pi and so on. So then you have, of course, Dakshinagni. So all these are done in Shrauta rituals and Agnihotra and all that they are doing. They need to have all these. And the altar at the middle is called Dashapurna Masa. When Dashapurna Masa Yajna is done, that is the shape of the altar which is used. So all these are part of sutras, Kalpa Sutras. You will find these kinds of details and so on. Then, of course, one have the Jyotisha. I'm not going to really talk about Jyotisha and Vyakarna, because we generally know what is Jyotisha and Vyakarna. So all these were also included along with the Vedas. So in other words, what is being told is all these are Aparavidya. So this has created a bit of a problem for us. How can you say Veda is Aparavidya? Because we also keep saying, everything is available in Veda. So our evolution and our liberation, everything we need to go after Shruti, Upanishads and so on. So now why is then Veda is called an Aparaveda, Aparavidya? and not Paravidya, is something which we have already seen, but some more let us see. Now, there are a few things which we need to understand. See, by the use of the word Veda Shabdena tu Sarvatra Sabda Rashihi Vivakshitaha. So, the choice of the word Veda here in this Upanishad, in this particular mantra, by that mention of the word Veda, what is in fact indicated always is this whole gamut of this literary knowledge. So essentially, when you say Veda is Aparavidya, what it is saying is whatever we have gathered in a literary form, either orally we transmitted or put it in a piece of paper and a book, and that's a matter. All that which we have actually obtained in a form which is belongs to a oral or a literary tradition, all those are called as that. So they are all at the end of the day sound, right? A word is nothing but sound only. When you say Vidya, I mean, it's a word, but it's a sound. So it is this world of sound. The entire assemblage of words is what is indicated as Veda, and call it as Aparavidya. Why? Because you look at the next sentence, Sabda Rashya Adigame api. Even if somebody have memorized, understood what is contained, assimilated the meaning of what is contained in a whole lot of books, which are all Veda and drawing out of Veda, Dharma Shastras, Puranas, Itihasas, Darshanas, whatever it is, all that, even if somebody has understood, assimilated the meaning of it, Shabda Rashya Adigame api, Yatna antarena, there is an effort required. Yatna antarena, only out of a certain kind of effort. Okay. Then Guru Abhigamanadi Lakshanam, going to a guru, approaching a guru, going to a guru for his Margadarshana. So, Guru Abhigamanadi Lakshanam, Vairagyam cha, and to develop deep dispassion on worldly matters, aparigraha and all that. So, without all these, na akshara adhigamaha sambhavati. Yaya aksharam adhigamyate is the mantra we saw. That which we are able to transcend beyond the words, beyond the letters, beyond the assemblage of words. So, because by merely reading all these Vedas, we will not be able to transcend the world of Vedas, world of all these letters and all these assemblage of words and all that. We need to make effort. We need to develop a Vairagya. You have what is called Sadhana Sampat, Chatushtaya. Iha Amutra Pala Viraga. We should distance ourselves from the effort, benefits we get out of the work we do and the benefits here and elsewhere. Iha amutra pala viragaha. Nitya anitya vastu vichara. We should very deeply be able to constantly do vichara of what is permanent and what is perishable. Then shamadamadi sadhana shat sampatta. And then mumukshutva. It's called sadhana chatushtaya. So all that is required. By reading Veda, we cannot get Paravidya is what is to be indicated somehow to us. That is why it says all these Vairagyam cha na akshara adhigamaha sambhavati iti pritakkaranam brahma vidyayaha paravidya iti katanam cha. In order to impress upon us, in order to bring this subtle aspect of the fact that while Veda and the Upanishad has the Jnanakanda, certainly they have the Jnanakanda, and in that sense they are actually Aparavidya. But the true Aparavidya that is being talked about is not something which is obtained by reading. It is obtained by a certain nishta, a certain kind of an anushtana, a certain kind of a mental makeup and prayatna that we have to do. So in order to indicate that, how do they indicate that? The only way you can indicate that is saying something which raises your eyebrow. Moment you say Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda, and Atharva Veda are Apara Vidya, then naturally the question comes, oh, then is there something more than all this? Is there something we have to do which is beyond all this? So that question has to come to our mind. And to highlight that particular issue, the mantra says Vedas are Aparavidya and Yad Eya Akshara Adhigamyate Sapara, that which transcends all these, which means even after knowing all these on a conceptual basis, we need to do something else. Go to the Guru, develop that Vairagya, make constant effort to experience that ultimate truth, and that what we get out of it is actually called Paravidya. So in order to explain all that, the mantra puts Veda into Aparavidya. So there is this mantra in Amrita Bindu Upanishad itself. It says, Grantam Abhyasya Medhavi Jnana Vijnana Tatparaha Palalamiva Danyarti Tyajet Grantam Aseshatah. So, what is it saying? A Medhavi, an intelligent person, one who is able to use his Medha Shakti very well. An intelligent person, what he does, Grantam Abhyasya, he will read Rigveda, he will read Yajurveda, Samaveda, all Vedangas and Itikasa Purana and all that. Grantam Abhyasya, having studied the scriptures. Okay. Now, having studied, you get only Jnana. But then one has to go beyond the Jnana into the domain of Vijnana, Visishta Jnana, which is a Jnana which is obtained out of an experiential feeling rather than knowing it outwardly by way of knowing the meaning of sentences and so on. That's not what is Vijnana. That is only Jnana. So Jnana Vijnana Tatparaha, so he goes beyond the book, he goes beyond the Grantha, he contemplates deeply what is written in a Grantha, maybe with the help of a Guru, with the Margadarshana of a Guru and all that, he contemplates, not just reads and memorizes and knows the meaning, but deeply experiences what is being told in that Grantha. So, Jnana Vijnana Tatparaha, that is the first line. Then it says, Palalamiva Dhanyarti. See, somebody who wants, if you want rice, what do? You, of course, take the rice is available along with the husk only. Rice, when you harvest it, and when you get it, that, tandula, that every grain of the rice is inside that husk only. So a person who is interested in the dhanyarti, what he will do, tejet palalamiva. He will actually dehusk it. He will clean it up, remove the husk. The husk is of no use for him. He will tejet palalamiva dhanyarti. So, and then he will consume only that grain. In the same way, after taking the Grantha, after reading the Grantha, after deeply contemplating and understanding what is being implied of the Grantha, once that Jnana Spurana has happened, Grantha is not required anymore. He will just drop the Grantha. So Rigveda, Yajurveda and all those as a Grantha is Aparavidya. The Paravidya is the experience you get out of contemplating what is there in the Grantha. So that is what this Amrita Bindu is saying, that Grantam Abhyasya Medhavi Jnana Vijnana Tatparaha Palalamiva Dhanyarti Tyajet Grantam Aseshatah. He doesn't need this book anymore. Aseshatah Tyajet. The husk is not required from the perspective of the benefit you get out of the Sasya. You want rice, you want rice. Husk can be used for something else, but the uddesha for which you wanted a rice will not be satisfied with the husk. So the husk will be completely, discarded. In the same way, the granthas will be eventually discarded by a true jnani. When jnana happens for him, the grantha is not required anymore. It only facilitated the process. So to that extent, they are aparavidya, they are paravidya. They don't stay with them. What stays with them is the anubhuti of what is told in the grantha. So that is what this Amrita Bindu Upanishad is saying. There is another Amritananda Upanishad in which again you see something very similar. And what it says, Shastranyadhiya Medhavi Abhyasya cha punah punah Param Brahma Vijnaya Ulkavat Tan Ataha Utsrijet. Ulkavat Tan Yatot Srijet. That is in Sandhi. So now what is this saying? Shastrani Adhiya. Shastranyadhiya. Shastrani Adhiya Medhavi. One Medhavi, after going through all the Shastras, so after he studies the scriptures, then what happens? Abhyasya cha punah punah. He repeatedly practices. He repeatedly tries to imbibe, tries to assimilate and live as per what is being told in the scriptures. That way he actually imbibes the idea what is contained in the scripture. So abhyasya cha punah punah, and by doing that, what happens? Param Brahma Vijnaya. So he finally gets the realization of the Brahman. So the final realization of the Brahman happens because this Medhavi repeatedly does manana, shavana, manana, nididhyasana and all that. He somehow brings what is contained in the scripture into himself or herself by living through it, by experiencing it in his own ways. By doing all that, he realizes the Brahman. Then what happens? Ulkavat tan ataha utsrijet. Just like somebody who carries a torch for the purpose of the journey. So once the journey is completed, then he will discard the torch. It is not required anymore. Purpose is served. So in the same way, the purpose of the Vedas and the Vedanga and all the Upavedas and Itihasa Puranas, Dharma Smritis, Dharma Shastras, etc., are all not to say I have memorized it, I know it by heart, any day I can tell you, ask me anything, I will tell you. I think that's not the purpose. The purpose is to go through it and to deeply contemplate, understand what is being told there and see how one can bring it into their own being by way of experience of living through that and so on. Having done all that, those knowledge is of little use for them. That's why in Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, there is a shloka which says, Traigunya Vishaya Veda Nistraigunya Bhava Arjuna. So if you take Veda as what is being written down in a few things, then it is Traigunya Vishaya. It is all contained within a certain kind of a boundary in which all these are there. Nistraigunya Bhava Arjuna is what he says in that chapter. I think there are two shlokas after that which says it is like when there is so much of water and there is so much water being there all around. What is the use of a well water? There is no use of a well water. Yata Udakapana and something like that. There is one shloka, is that some 45th shloka, I think, in chapter 2 of Bhagavad Gita. So that shloka also is saying that when somebody is immersed in full of water everywhere, then what is the use of a well water? In the same way, when this jnana sampadana happens, when this realization of that ultimate jnana happens to an individual, then all these are of no use. The Vedas and the Vedangas, and that's why, in that sense, they are actually aparavidya. But they are important because that takes us through that process. So, therefore, we should not see any conflict in this statement. We should see how the message comes very subtly by placing it like this. So, this is why this way, Veda, Yajurveda, Samavedo, Atharva Veda, Siksha, Kalpa, Nirutta, Chandas, Jyotisha, all of them become aparavidya. Then he says, Para Eyata Akshara, Aksharam Adigamyate. So the mantra also says that that is Paravidya, by which we are able to transcend all these become less important, all these become irrelevant, all these become contextless for us. So that is called the true Paravidya, is what that mantra says. And that true Paravidya is told in the next mantra. It's explained also in a little bit of detail. We'll see the sixth mantra. So in this sixth mantra, there is this some more description of what is this Paravidya. So far we saw the Aparavidya. So the Paravidya needs to be now explained in some ways. So that is being attempted in mantra 6. So what does it say? Yattadadreshyamagrahyam agotram avarnam achakshushrotram tadapanipadam Nityam vibhum sarvagatam susukshmam tadavyayam yadbhuta yonim paripashyanti dhiraha. So let us do a padacheda of all these. I mean, it looks complicated. It's a very simple thing. The moment we do the padacheda. Yat tat adreshyam agrahyam agotram avarnam achakshuhu shrotram tat apani padam. There are a lot of negative. So yat tat adreshyam, not dreshyam, adreshyam. Okay, it should have been drishyam, but in Veda it is dreshyam, adreshyam, and not grahyam, agrahyam, and not gotram, agotram, not varnam, avarnam, not chakshushrotram, achakshushrotram, not panipadam, apanipadam. So it says that is something which is adreshyam, not visible. Agrahyam, you cannot grasp it. See, if it is something physical, this can be taken now. This is the lid of that flask which I am using. So this is grahyam. This mobile phone is grahyam. I am able to hold, I am able to grasp it, right? And a word can be grasped. Whereas this is agrahyam. Then agotram. Agotram means, gotra is that which has an origin or some mula. So it has no mula like that. So agotram. Avarnam. It has no, at varna is not color. Varna means a certain attribute, description of a certain attribute, it can be called varna. So it says avarnam. Achakshuhu shrotram. It is not the organ of eye and ear, etc., etc. It is not the organ of pani and pada also. Not the upper limbs or the lower limbs. It is not even that. Tata apani padam. Nityam. It is, so the second line is actually can be easily understood the moment we understood the first line. So let us try to understand the first line, because once we understand the first line, another way to explain is actually the second line. Nityam vibhum sarvagatam susukshmam tadavyayam yadbhuta yonim, all that. So adreshyam, what do you mean by adreshyam? So let us look at all these first line first, one step at a time. Adreshyam means sarvesham buddhindriyanam agamyam. In other words, when you say I see, you say I see, you can only see an object. So the moment I say I see, moment you say something can be seen, then that something belongs to the domain called object. That's why I'm able to see a temple, I'm able to see a photo, I'm able to see a video screen, I'm able to see a person, I'm able to see an elephant, I'm able to see an insect. So all these are available for the jnanendriyas. And Adreshyam is only an example. By seeing, the mantra is saying all the jnanendriyas. So hearing also included, smelling also included, touching and feeling is also included. So this is Adreshyam is only an indication. In fact, anything which is in the domain of object, not subject, in the domain of object, then that can be accessed through jnanendriyas. That is the job of the jnanendriya. The jnanendriya goes out, looks for a color, it looks for a smell, it looks for a shape. That's what it does. And all these are nothing but the world of objects. In other words, Sri Krishna talks about it in Gita as kshetram. So what it is saying, that Paravidya, what is being covered in Paravidya is not a matter of seen. It doesn't belong to the domain of object. Then what does it belong to? It belongs to the domain of subject. The seer cannot be seen. The seer sees everything. The seer smells everything. The seer tastes everything. The taster tastes everything. The hearer hears everything. But what about the hearer? How do you hear the hearer? How do you see the seer? How do you smell the smeller? Right? So, by this, what the mantra is saying is Paravidya belongs to the domain of subject and not object. So, moment you say it doesn't belong to the domain of object, then Jnanendriyas, Vyapara is not possible. There is no work for Jnanendriyas. From the perspective of Paravidya, from the perspective of Aparavidya, you need Jnanendriya only. Without Jnanendriya, you don't get Aparavidya. So therefore, it belongs to the domain of subject and not object. Agrahyam, grasp. The moment you say you have to grasp, it has something to do with karmendriya, not jnanendriya. You pick, you take, you leave, you consume. All these. So karmendriya vishayam, karmendriya avishayam, karmendriya vishayam ityetat. So Paravidya, since it has nothing to do with the object, then it cannot be picked, it cannot be consumed, it cannot be felt using this different thing. It cannot, some vyavahara cannot be done on it using our karmendriyas, using our pani, pada and all that kind of things. Therefore, Paravidya belongs to again to the domain of subject, and moment it belongs to the domain of subject, then it does not make itself available in the world of transactions. Karmendriya is required for the world of transactions. And if you have to transact, you have to transact with something other than you. You don't transact to yourself. The moment you say transact, that means you are there, something else is there, and there is some vyapara which is happening between the two. So by saying agrahyam, we are only saying that that is not possible. Paravidya does not belong to that domain. Then agotra. Gotra means which has some origin or some source. So the problem with that is, moment you say something as a source, okay, then there is a state when it was not existent before its source. Now if you take this mobile, This mobile was manufactured on a particular day. Until then, it was not available. And so is the stula body of many of us. There is a date of birth attached to it. So, Paravidya belongs to that matter which has no origin. And if it has no origin, obviously it has no end. These two are the pairs. If something has an origin, then it has to have a jatasya dhruva mrityuhu. That's what Krishna says. If something starts, it has to end. If something ends, it will start again sometime. Whereas Paravidya is that knowledge that we have to get, which does not belong to anything which has a beginning or an end or either. That is why it is called Agotram. So it is Anadi and Ananta. That is the meaning of it. That means it exists forever and all that kind of things. Then Avarnam. The moment you say Varna, by the choice of the word Varna, we are actually trying to bring some attribute, some guna. It's called Dravya Dharma. See, some substance, moment you have some substance, moment you talk of a substance, then you can talk about Stulatvadeha. Either it is gross or subtle, it is thin, it is visible to naked eye, you can see it through a telescope. Something we keep saying, na? It's all part of Dravya Dharma. Or Shuklatvadeha. You know, it is white, it is dark, it is yellow, it is green, it is smelling, it is not smelling, all that. So it does not belong to a subject matter. It is not a substance. It's a ethereal, non-ethereal. Okay. So in other words, it is beyond all these Dravya Dharma. Moment you bring it into a Dravya Dharma, then you limit it. See, moment you say there is a flask which is 1 feet tall, it is red color, there is a black color cap on the top of it. All these are called Upadhi Dharma. You are already conditioned. You are, moment you use a varna, moment you use a description, a guna, a saguna upasana, a saguna, when you try to, talk about of it in terms of its property, its color, its length, its smell, its taste, and so on, we have already brought it to a domain of a finiteness. Whereas by saying avarnam and taking it out of the Dravya Dharma, what is being indicated is it is limitless. It is beyond the conditioned part of existence. It is something which is not conditioned. It may appear conditioned. In a body, as when it is transacting through the body, it gets a feeling that it is conditioned. By its very nature, it is unconditioned. That is what is indicated by avarnam. Then you have achakshuhu shrotram. So you can say, fine, does it have its own karmendriyas? Chakshu and shrotram are karmendriyas. Pani and padam are, chakshu and shrotram are jnanendriyas. And pani and padam are karmendriyas. By negating that, achakshu shrotram apani padam. What we are saying, nama rupa vishaye karane abhava. All these are required to engage in any kind of a transaction. So now this paravidya is about that entity which does not actually need to necessarily engage in any transaction. It can stay without engaging in any of the transaction. And moment it stays not engaged in transaction, then there is no need for chakshu and shrotra, there is no need for pani and pada. This is one way to understand. Another way to understand is moment we engage. See, we all engage in so many things in the world. Moment we engage, I talk about it when I talk about rajoguna and so on. Satya rajo tamo guna, when we talk about, I actually talk about it. See, when we engage in something, it is an expression of an imperfection which we want to make it perfect. That's why we engage in action. We feel we are imperfect. We feel our knowledge is not full. So in order to gain that epsilon knowledge which is still evading us, we engage in action. Whereas Paravidya is something which is knowledge itself, then where is the need to engage? If it is omnipresent, if it is available everywhere, how can you engage in action? The moment you have to engage in action, you need to be different from something else. And you have to have that separation between you and something else. And so therefore you engage in action. So moment you are omnipresent, moment you are nothing but embodiment of knowledge itself, then where is the room for actually engaging into any world of action? It's not required. That's why it is called achakshushotram apanipadam, because nama rupa vishaya, all these karana and all those are not required because it is embodiment of knowledge itself. So it doesn't have to engage to improve its knowledge or to remove its imperfection and so on, because it is perfection personified. So these are the first set of descriptions. Yat tat adreshyam agrahyam agotram avarnam chakshusotram tadapanipadam. If you understand it, you'll be able to understand the second part much easily, because once we understand that is what Paravidya's attribute is, it can also be described as Nityam, Vibhum, Sarvagatam, etc., etc., which we will see in the next class. I think we will stop here. Thank you. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Shri Guru Namaha. Hari Om Shubharat.